to J. Henry & Sons.
Thank you very much. So, if you don't mind, share a little bit about yourself, J. Henry, and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. Well, where we're sitting right now is actually the home that I was brought up in. It was my parents' home, and downstairs below us is our tasting room. You came in through the driveway, so that's part of the farm. Everything that's outside there is part of the farm. We still farm full time. We farm typically about 2,000 acres a year, mainly seed corn and soybean seed, and then of course the red corn and the wheat and the rye for the bourbon. So that takes up about 100 acres of the total production of the year.
Wow.
So and then later on we'll tour the RACKHOUSES, and you can take a look at the tasting room down below as well, or whatever you'd like to see.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be great. So regarding your bourbon specifically, or whiskeys, what are some of the expressions that you have now, things you're kind of working on, things along those lines?
Yeah. Well, our first product, well, a little bit of background is we did our first batch in December 2009. And we came out with and the other part of our story is that we age all of our bourbons for a minimum of 5 years. So that first batch didn't come out or wasn't on the shelves until spring of 2015, and that was our 92 proof small batch blend. It's about a 10-barrel blend. And then after that, we started coming out with single barrel cask strength, which we call Patton Road Reserve, which is the road as you drove in here is the road that the farm is on, is Patton Road.
Beautiful drive in too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So that's Patton Road Reserve, single barrel cask strength. We just bottle that up, obviously, right out of the barrel. No filtration. It comes out usually around 119, 120 proof. We just came out with our first Patton Road Reserve 7-year last spring. And we came out with another half a dozen barrels this fall. We're pretty much running out of it now. We're into the end of December. So we're that was kind of a milestone for us to come out with our first 7-year-old bourbons this year. Yeah. And then the last product that we have right now is a product that we call Bellefontaine Reserve, which it's named after my great-grandfather's farm in Basco, Wisconsin, which Bellefontaine means beautiful fountain in French. Henry is actually a French name. Okay. My great-grandfather settled in a little town called Basco, which is just north of Belleville, Wisconsin. And he named his farm Bellefontaine because there's a little stream, a little fountain stream there. So that's where that name came from.
Yeah.
So that's a 6-year-old bourbon. And it's about a 10 to 12 barrel blend, kind of a special selection of barrels, a little fruitier, maybe a little lighter than the typical, bourbon. And then we finish, we blend that all together using a very slow method of proofing down, and then we finish them in cognac barrels for about 8 months. And so that's our kind of latest product other than the 7-year-old Patton Road. My son Joe, he's working on kind of a special blend that he wants to introduce probably sometime in 2019. It's going to be a very limited selection, but probably come out on an annual basis. So that'll be kind of a, maybe a very small blend of really special barrels, and so he's really excited about that.
Yeah, that's always fun when you can have a little new project or something, kind of, push the envelope, so to speak, nowadays, because that become, finished whiskeys has become very popular. I enjoy personally the cognac finished, bourbons. It's really kind of imparts a lot of that nice flavor. So yeah,
that's actually one of my favorite. I obviously drink a lot of my own bourbon, so that's my kind of go-to. I really love that Bellefontaine.
Yeah. So I guess my other question would be, what was it that got you into either the bourbon or led you in the direction of wanting to become a owner distiller?
Well, we see 2009, about 2007, an organization called the ADI, American Distillers, not American Distillers Institute. You probably are familiar with that organization. Yeah. They were kind of just getting started. Craft distilling was kind of just getting started, and I just developed an interest. I like bourbon, have liked bourbon for some time before that. And we went on a trip with ADI back then, and it happened to be in Kentucky, and so we just toured a lot of the distilleries down there at that time. And I just kind of got the bug, I guess. We came back and said this would really be a neat, another way to diversify our farming business here. And the greatest thing about bourbon in our world is it's made from corn, so we grow a lot of corn here, and it just seemed to be a nice fit. We had some buildings here that would, one in particular that was really well suited to kind of make into a rick house, so we kind of had that going for us. And then it just kind of, morphed into, from that time, just kind of became an idea, but that came to fruition in a way. Yeah. We decided early on that we were not going to build a distillery here. We raise all the corn, wheat, the rye, and we ship it to a distiller in New Richmond, Wisconsin, Paul Werney, and he does our distillation according to our kind of protocol and how we want it done. We bring it back here, we do our barreling, and then do all the aging here on the premises. So that was one way for us. I didn't want to come out with a bourbon that was any less than 5 years old. So that was one way for us to get in the way I wanted to get into it without having millions of dollars tied up into a distillery. I didn't want to make vodka or gin, so that was really kind of our model. We've got a lot of money tied up in the farm, in the land, and equipment that it just seemed to make sense for what we wanted to do here.
Yeah. So with the family still being like in farming, and all of the different like heirloom, corns and things that there are there ones that you kind of gravitate towards, like now things you're kind of experimenting with, things along those lines, or what do you see kind of like changing with, like, I guess the corn industry in terms of what's being used to kind of produce bourbon these days?
Well, one of the decisions, I think an important decision we made, is what we were going to make our bourbon out of. So we decided that we would make the corn that we use is actually an old hybrid that was developed in the 1930s, 1940s by the University of Wisconsin. And so my father produced a lot of that. He was a seed corn farmer, producer as well. And seed corn is seed that's sold to farmers, and then they plant it, and it's for their use of crops, for their crop. And so this was a hybrid. It was actually called W335A. It was a very popular hybrid back then, and my father sold tons of it. I mean, and it lasted from probably the 40s, and we were still producing it. I still produced some in the early 70s, and it was that popular of a hybrid. And what was really unique about it is that it was a beautiful red colored ear. And I remembered that when I was a kid, at harvest, and these wagon loads of big red ears were coming in, and it was really, really cool. So I wanted to make bourbon out of that. And so it took quite a bit to get enough seed back, because it hadn't been used anymore. University of Wisconsin still has a little seed bank where they keep some of the seed stock, and we were able to get our hands on some of that and increase it to a point over a few years that we had enough to make bourbon. Yeah. The other thing that we use is a rye that was developed by the University of Wisconsin. It's called Spooner Rye, named after Spooner, Wisconsin. There's a research station up there, and that was developed up there. And it's an older rye as well. And then we are working with the university now and actually planted our first crop this fall of a couple of wheats that came out of the University of Wisconsin wheat program as well. So we're trying to kind of bring back some of these old hybrids and old varieties in our bourbons. And I think it really, I think it has a big effect on a big influence on the flavor of our product.
Yeah, I think it's interesting from the standpoint of being very, I guess I'll use the word, craft, but that I think allows, you to be very, experimental, you know what you like, know like what those corns, like kind of what they impart flavor-wise, so it allows you to be very kind of crafty in terms of what it is you're making. So are there some thoughts to actually produce a wheated bourbon?
I think that'll be in the plan. Well, I think it is in the plan, but we have to be a little bit careful because of our size. We're not Diageo.
Yeah.
And so you can't. I think we want to be really focused and not have too many products out there. And whatever we do, we want to be able to do well. And I think the more products you spread yourself out on, the chances are you're not going to be quite as good as you want to be. Yeah. We are making rye now, so we put up our first batch of rye last spring. So same thing, we'll probably age that for a minimum of 5 years, maybe. We'll see how how it's doing at 4 years, but
yeah. Well, I think that's important because as you probably are very familiar with, nowadays there's that mad rush to get the product out into the market, from a monetary standpoint. But that can be very, I think, in just tasting several bourbons or whiskeys, that rush to get things out there onto the market can be a big mistake, I think, a lot of times, for it to still have that really strong, grainy flavor that becomes a turnoff for a lot of bourbon drinkers, especially when you're, comparing it to a lot of the stock of the big boys,
right?
And to rush that out and to charge a premium price for it, to get that customer back, that can be a very difficult task,
Well, that was a lesson that I learned in the seed business because we raise seed corn here, and a farmer has 40 crops in his lifetime that he will put in. Let's just say that. And so the seed that he buys for those crops are critically important to him. And if you sell him a bag of seed corn that he plants it and doesn't turn out very well for that year, you will never sell that farmer another bag of seed corn. Yeah. And I kind of felt that same way when we went into the bourbon business. We wanted to come up with something good, very good, because I knew, hey, it's easy to sell the first bottle, right? It's the second and the third bottle that's the tough ones. So we were looking at the second and third bottle. That's the ones we wanted to sell.
Yeah. So was when you first produced, let's say, the first bottle or first batches went out, was that I don't want to say source, but that was somebody else's bourbon or whiskey, and then you were able to shortly after that start to provide them with your own corn in order to produce your mash bill.
No, we did not do that.
Oh.
So we made our first batch in December of 2009, and then every year after that we kept making batches but increasing our production. But we didn't sell anything until spring of 2015.
Oh.
That was always our own product.
Okay.
So we didn't source any product. Well, I caught a lot of flack about that when we came out with in 2015, and we came out, no one had heard of us, and we were saying, hey, we got 5 years on our label, and we were getting letters and emails and saying, hey, how are you doing this? You can't this. You come on, be transparent and all this stuff. And I said, hey, it's our stuff. We didn't.
Yeah.
It came from here.
Well, and that's important. I mean, like we were saying before. I mean, to most things people are maybe nowadays trying to push out a straight bourbon whiskeys, minimum 2 years. But the patience for you to let that go, for a minimum of 5 years. I mean, that's kudos to the brand. Now, I've had all of the bourbons that you produce, and I think you can taste that quality that's there. So that's one of the main things I think that was always important to me was, to have a product that's quality from day one. There's a lot of companies out there who, do put out that, 6 month, 1 year bourbon. But to me, I think it's a mistake. And for you guys in the craft world, so to speak, to have a bourbon that's a minimum of 5 years, that's impressive.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
But every brand has their own philosophy. This is our philosophy. We like it, but it may not be the right philosophy for other folks. So I respect everybody that's doing their thing, and I think the craft spirits business and products that are out there are good, and they're getting better. But this is how we decided to do it.
Yeah. So I guess going back to the bourbon specifically, how involved are you in the tasting part of it, the blending, kind of what goes into some of that? Are you doing all the blending yourself, things along those lines?
Well, what we did is, first of all, I think what happens after the still, I think, is probably the most important thing that happens to a spirit, especially a bourbon, especially an aged spirit. A lot of people say, 75% or higher of the flavor profile, the aroma, obviously all of the color comes from the barrel, is affected by the maturation process, how you decide to blend, which barrels you choose, your mash bill, the quality of the grains that are going, what the type of grains and the quality of the grains that are going into it. So other than the still, we pretty much have complete control of that, and we also have protocols for how we want our stuff distilled. So when you're talking about blending and maturation and barrel selection, those are huge decisions. So we have control of all of that. We do our own tasting and blending. We do hire a person, a noser taster, that helps us with tasting and blending. And our palates are becoming more and more sophisticated. My both sons are involved in tasting, and my wife has been involved in tasting and barrel selection and helping putting blends together. So it's not just one person. It's all of us.
Yeah, it's important to have that team, that quality control to ultimately get, what it is, you want your bourbon or your whiskey to taste like. Yeah. Nowadays the big rave is, who the master distiller is, all of that. But like you touched on before, I think maybe the most important part is, that blender, that person who is, or people who are responsible for putting that particular bourbon or whiskey, into that bottle. Because if it going in isn't exactly how you want it, the whiskey world is very savvy nowadays. They're going to know that, and to, it's important to have that quality going into, those barrels, or into those bottles. But, I think now you can really focus a lot on these people who are master blenders, things along those lines, because that's maybe as important, if not more important, than the quote-unquote master distiller. I don't know if that's the same now as it used to be maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but now for people or teams to have blenders and tasters put something together that works for your profile, that's the most important thing in my eye. So,
well, we feel that the type of barrels that we use and where that wood comes from. There's a lot of things that you there's a ton of decisions that you make on the type of barrel and the type of wood that you use, and it's a huge decision, and it's another huge decision on what the mash bill is and the quality of the grains that you use, those things, and then how long you age it, what are the conditions that the aging takes place, and then once you get that age to a proper point, all those things have to come together, and then the final step is, like you say, tasting every barrel and figuring out the blends and the profiles that you want to come up with. For all these, we only have 4 products, but yeah. So it's a big deal, and there's a lot before and after the still. The still is a necessity, obviously, and it takes a talented person to run that. But there's a whole lot of things that happen before and after the still that have to come together to make a really good product.
I guess speaking of still, is all or most of your stuff done through column or a pot still?
It's a column still.
Column still, okay. I guess barrel-wise, are these barrels that you manufacture, or are these barrels that you're purchasing from a independent?
No, we don't make our own barrels here. And that's a whole. If you ever have a chance to go to a cooperage, go to one. That's another whole. That's a whole nother industry, a whole nother talent and artistry, and so we buy our barrels from a company in Missouri, and they make our barrels to our specs as far as char and toast and a number of years that we require our wood to be air dried before they even go to the cooper. Yeah. So that's a big deal. Yeah.
Well, I guess before we kind of wrap things up, is there?
I wish I could make a barrel.
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting process, and I have been able to go through a cooperage and to watch. I mean, that's not just making a barrel. I mean, that's craftsmanship. I mean, those guys who do that day in and day out. I mean, it's as impressive watching them do what they do, and the amount of work that goes into making one barrel. I mean, it's so much, you know. And then in the bourbon world, for you to essentially only be able to use that barrel one time, you know, it's a bit sad from that standpoint. I mean, I know you can classify it as other things and reuse it again, but it's an extreme craft. So, but
but there are some great uses, and people are really getting creative about using ex-bourbon barrels. We sell a lot of our barrels to obviously brewers, but also maple syrup guys and coffee roasters, and people. It's really pretty crazy how many things people are using them for.
Yeah. So I guess, like I said before we kind of wrap things up, anything else you want to kind of share? Anything kind of, in the works coming down the pike a little bit?
Well, as far as new products, we are setting barrels aside every year now. We are setting barrels aside for 10-year barrels. We're probably a couple years away from introducing our first 10-year-old barrel, but we're looking at that. And then this special kind of blend, we don't even have a name for it yet, but it's going to be something that comes out on an annual basis, and that'll be a real kind of a special, unique bourbon blend.
Well, that'll be special. I mean, 10 years and to have a different blend. I know you said your son Joe was working on that, so I would imagine as a dad, that'll be a nice special moment to let him kind of craft his own his own thing. So
we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, good. So, all right, well, Mr. Henry, thank you very much for taking a few times. So thank you very much.
Thanks for stopping out. And we only age in these kind of traditional size 53-gallon barrels. Okay. So this is where our first batch was aged, and the way this rick house is laid out is the oldest barrels are up front here. We've got our blends, this year's coming blends, kind of all selected out and chosen. So you can see this is batch 52. So all batch 52 barrels are right here, and then 53 is in here somewhere. Okay. So, and then all of those are, and then it gets younger.
Okay. All right.
And then, so way in the back are the kind of the new make, and then all of our special barrels, like the 7 to 10 barrels, 7 year to 10 year barrels, are way back there.
Okay.
We can go down there if you like.
Sure.
You get a little bit better picture of once you're here. We don't have any electricity in this building.
Okay.
So
it's obviously a non-temperature controlled.
Right. Yeah, we think that's really important. That you don't have a temperature control, because I think that gives you the character of place. You know, this is obviously Wisconsin bourbon, and you know, if you have this in a heated environment or temperature control, you don't. Well, it might as well be anywhere.
I agree. Well, you know, and I think, you know, we're in a state where we experience extreme cold and heat. Right. So I mean, we have a great environment for bourbon to be.
Yeah,
to be made.
That's how I feel about it, and so.
Yeah, very cool.
So this is the first one. I'll take you into the blending house, and then we can jump in there, and I'll show you the new rick house.
How many barrels do you have in here approximately?
There's probably about 800 in here.
Okay.
And then we're starting to fill up the new rick house. I'll take you over there.
How many barrels are you producing a year, roughly?
This year we're going to put about 700 away. So this is our newest rick house. We just finished this in the spring of 18 this year, and we're starting to fill it up. This is this year's. We haven't packed it away yet, but this is this year's new make rye.
Okay.
We're done with the rye now, and now we're making bourbon. We'll start bringing that in.
And the plan is to let this rest 5 years as well.
Yeah. I think we'll see what it's like at 4 years, but our plan is to at least go 5 if not more, and then we'll do probably the same thing. We'll set some of these barrels aside for even longer aging. We'll see how they go.
I guess that's the thing, you know, it's one of those deals you never know really when it's going to be ready. It's ready when it's ready.
Yeah, right. So the thing about this rick house here, if you notice, it's kind of a mirror of our original rick house, except it's obviously bigger, but it's also positioned east-west, so we get nice winds coming. We can open up these ventilation doors. We feel it's really important to, you know, have good ventilation in your rick house. You don't want stagnant air by any means. We've got a lot of windows in here because we like a lot of sun shining in on the barrels. And then we've got a cupola, and then it's lined in natural, you know, untreated natural wood.
Yeah.
So
very, very nice. That smell. I wish you could like duplicate that in your home or something.
Yeah.
You know, that's
right.
A great smell.
Yeah.
Approximately how many barrels can you put in here at that?
We should be able to get about 5,000 in here.
Okay.
So we're trying to, you know, we're going to gear up and try to get it filled up as quickly as we can, but we'll see how it all works out.
Very, very nice.
So all of the corn, wheat, and the rye are produced on this farm here. So it's kind of fun in the summer months. I can point to the red corn and the wheat and the rye, and I say, well, you know, you'll be drinking that in 6 years.
This is where the magic happens, so
Yeah,
to speak.
this is a blending house. These are the cognac barrels that we use for the Bellefontaine. Right here, these big ones. This is our next batch of Bellefontaine that we're working on right now.
Well, these are larger barrels here.
Yeah.
Right?
For cognac, this is kind of the size they use, and then they use much bigger ones as well. You know, they'll go from this size to twice that size to 10 times that size.
Is there a reason they use a larger barrel, or just?
I'm not sure. Tradition. They cognac barrels are kind of. They don't char their cognac barrels. They're toasted or much, and they use, as the cognac gets older, they usually cycle the cognac from newer barrels to older barrels.
Interesting.
Yeah, they kind of finish their cognac and armagnacs in older and older barrels.
Yeah, interesting. It smells good.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to shoot for about 100.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, of course. Did he tell you about the Petito already?
I didn't.
No.
Oh man. Well, if we have any right here, that'd be cool to try also.
Is that your blend?
The Petito?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about the one that you were working on.
I think
I told him you were working on that special.
that's still at home, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very delicate working process. I think I screwed up the ratio of my sample last night. Oh man. But Laura, those are the Petito barrels right there.
Yeah.
So what we do with this is super crazy. So these little barrels right here, these are all filled like about halfway with water.
Okay.
And these are RX bourbon casks, so 5-year-old bourbon. They're filled about halfway with water, and then we fortify it with our own bourbon to like 30% alcohol.
Yeah.
And so we've been aging these barrels for like 3 years. These are all 3 years old.
The Petito in there is at least 3 years old.
So it's 30% alcohol, water, and 3 years old. And it's called Petit O in this cognac blending process.
Yeah.
And then this is what we're actually using to proof the Bellefontaine down while it's in this cognac cask.
Oh, interesting. Not just standard water.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason you're proofing stuff is to get like a couple benefits. You create consistency with your flavor profile and your proof. So that's why we have the small batch proof to 46% or 92 proof. Because then every single bottle, you know, is going to be the exact same, more or less.
Yeah.
You save money on taxes too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what he cares about.
Hey, however you gotta do it. I know
Yeah, because you pay by the proof gallon.
Yeah.
And you increase the yield per barrel because you're, you know, diluting it with water. That's the problem though, is you're diluting something with water and you're diluting the flavor profile. So using this Petit O, you're still accomplishing the consistency throughout the barrels, the consistency by the proof, but instead of using a product that's diluting your flavor, you're using a product that's actually enhancing it.
Interesting. That name, what is that name?
It's French for
Little water.
Weak water.
Yeah.
Weak or little water.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think I've ever, I mean, maybe other people do, but I've never heard of like that process before of, you know, proofing it down with something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody in the U.S. is doing it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a common practice in France.
Really?
Yeah.
For Cognac and Armagnacs.
Interesting.
Because he's French, that's how he got it.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, cheers.
Cheers. Yeah, thank you for having me up here. Appreciate
Yeah,
seeing you
sorry
guys.
I was late. I didn't think I was late though, but whatever. Leave it to Liz. But these are all empty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is about,
We've got to get another three barrels.